Stories like this push more than buttons. They push change. If one shove can spark a viral moment that leads to policy, then small acts of courage matter in ways people often underestimate. If this scene touched you, consider what you would do in similar circumstances. Would you record, step in, call for support, or look away? There is no simple answer for every moment, but this story shows one path that worked: calm, documented, and followed through with systems designed to take action. Share this video if you believe dignity should be protected in public spaces. Comment with your thoughts or your experience on flights, and subscribe for more stories where injustice meets accountability. We will close with this: respect is not optional. It is a basic operating condition for any service that moves people from one place to another. When it fails, it must be fixed. When it is defended, it is worth sharing.
In a quiet room after the storm, the woman sat with her partner and their child. She was calm, but not triumphant. She spoke to the people who had reached out, not to gloat, but to insist on a simple truth: people deserve dignity. She used the moment to press for change. She met with operations leaders to improve training, de-escalation techniques, and support for passengers who felt vulnerable. She asked that the airline invest in listening tours and community outreach. Her aim was structural, not personal. The lesson is clear and modest. Systems can allow small abuses to persist until someone insists on better. Accountability need not be dramatic. It can be procedural, calm, and effective. When it is, it protects hundreds of thousands of future passengers. The woman's choice to respond with both restraint and clarity showed a different route to justice than spectacle. Her identity mattered less than the outcome: a policy review, staff training, and public promises that, if kept, would reduce the chances of this happening again. By the time the flight landed, the story had left the cabin. Social media picked it up with speed that would have been impossible a decade earlier. Clips went viral under hashtags like "Respect Passengers" and "Crew Accountability." News sites ran short pieces noting the incident and the swift suspension. Internally, the airline's public relations desk moved into action. A formal apology was issued. HR opened an investigation. Training was scheduled and broadcast to crew teams across routes. The attendant faced administrative leave and a formal review. The company emphasized respect and de-escalation in every release. But the real shockwaves were human. Passengers who had been passive in their seats now sent messages thanking the woman for holding her ground the way she did. Some viewers wrote that the clip reminded them to stand up for others. Civil rights groups used the moment to highlight patterns of physical and verbal abuse toward passengers with fewer resources or less social cover. The attendant's career did not end overnight, but the event marked a turning point in her relationship to authority and to the standards enforced by the airline. The woman who had been struck returned to her life carrying a vindication that felt more like responsibility. The story spread beyond a single incident into conversations about training, power, and what passengers might reasonably expect when they fly.
The woman placed one terse call to the operations center number she kept for emergencies. The line connected to a voice trained to handle crises. She spoke plainly and without drama. "I was just struck by your crew member. I need to speak to a supervisor and to operations." At first, the person on the other end treated it like a passenger complaint, but the tone changed quickly when the woman added a phrase she had avoided until then: "I am on board as a representative of the company." That was the sentence the crew did not expect. The voice on the line paused and then said, "Stand by, we are escalating." A ripple of movement passed through the cabin. The captain paused, a flight attendant whispered into a headset,
and someone at the back stood and watched. The attendant who had shoved the woman saw the phone, and for the first time, something like fear crossed her face. She had enforced rules without question. She had never been called to account mid-flight. Then the pilot, calm but firm, stood and walked down the aisle. He addressed the cabin in a steady voice and asked the man and the woman to remain seated. But he also asked the attendant to step aside. The attendant tried to protest, but the pilot's tone left no room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot announced, "we will resolve this on board. I apologize for the distress. For the record, every passenger deserves to be treated with respect." Inside the cockpit, communications were busy. The operations center confirmed the identity of the woman. She had been recently appointed to an executive position tasked with overseeing several of the airline's operational divisions. She was the rare kind of executive who intentionally took flights to observe the service firsthand. When that went public, the cabin response changed. People looked at the attendant differently. Cameras recorded the new exchange as the woman chose her words carefully, refusing to gloat. She requested a written apology and immediate steps to ensure crew accountability. The pilot obliged, and by corporate order, suspended the attendant from flight duty pending investigation. The announcement was crisp, a professional correction that exposed a misstep without spectacle, but it carried consequence. Outside the direct drama, the video spread. Passengers uploaded the clip, which exploded online. Comments poured in from viewers outraged at the assault and gratified by the swift correction. The attendant's face, once rigid with certainty, showed the unraveling of someone who assumed authority without accountability. This moment was a reversal of power, not through shouting, but through procedure. The woman used her role and the airline's systems to create accountability where personal conflict had almost ruled. Passengers who moments before were paralyzed by the scene found voice in their cameras and in the public square beyond the plane.
The attendant repeated herself, louder this time, accusing the woman of causing a disturbance. A passenger muttered, "That is unacceptable." Another passenger, agitated, asked the steward to apologize. The attendant waved them off. The woman kept the baby close and reached for her phone. She tapped a contact, but her fingers hovered. She did not want to turn this into a spectacle for the family. She wanted resolution. Someone recorded the shove and the reaction. The video began to travel through private messages. A young man in the next row uploaded a clip to social media with the caption, "Flight attendant hits passenger, unbelievable." Comments started to form, and the mood shifted from confusion to anger in seconds. The attendant, sensing growing resistance from fellow passengers, barked a threat instead of an apology. "If you don't calm down, we'll have to remove you." The word remove carried weight. It made passengers flinch. The woman's husband rose, but she put a hand on his arm to stop him. Her calm came from a place of purpose. She made one call with a quiet voice. That call would change everything. It was small, private, and decisive. It would be the turning point.
The woman who was hit was not a random traveler. She had a history of quietly moving through rooms that did not expect her to be there. She grew up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce. She worked every overtime shift she could, got scholarships, and pushed through late nights to make a career out of small, steady wins. She had recently accepted a leadership role at a major airline. That detail wasn't visible in the cabin. She wore no badge and carried no press release. To most people, she was a mother, tired but careful. To those who watched her career, she was known as the kind of leader who fixed problems before anyone noticed them. Her calm after being hit was not weakness. It was a habit learned in boardrooms where losing composure cost you leverage. She put the baby first, then dialed a number she rarely used in public. Her silence was strategic. People who had underestimated her before had paid attention later. This was a story of patience, resilience, and of power quietly held. The reveal of who she really was would not be about ego, it would be about accountability. That contrast is the dramatic fuel. A woman of power choosing dignity over spectacle and using that to transform the moment. The attendant had been on this route for years. Colleagues called her efficient. Passengers sometimes called her sharp. Behind the smiles and the checklists, she kept a ledger in her head of who belonged in which part of the cabin. Small slights accumulated into a habit of policing passengers. There were rumors. A steward once avoided assisting a black family after a brusque comment. An elderly couple had once left a formal complaint about a curt remark that made them cry in the terminal. Supervisors had filed notes, but complaints rarely stuck. The airline operated at speed and scale. Habits like hers were tolerated because they kept schedules and kept things orderly. Her attitude came from a place of control, not service. She saw rules as tools to enforce a social order she preferred. That pattern explained the shove. Annoyance disguised as authority, impatience turned physical. She had done it before in smaller ways. Today she escalated, and the cabin paid attention. This is the kind of person the audience will want to see humbled. The script needs that moral clarity. The attendant's backstory makes the push more than a single bad moment. It places the action in a pattern. That pattern would meet a counterforce the crew could not have imagined.
Pull the camera back. This flight was full of regular people and professionals. There were parents with children, a couple returning from a business trip, a woman reading quietly. It was ordinary travel until that moment. The woman's husband, sitting across the aisle, rose slowly, eyes sharp. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some opened apps, some asked the attendant to explain, others pretended not to notice. The infant began to cry louder. The child's small body shook in the woman's arms. The moment had gone from awkward to urgent. This flight was a confined stage. Everyone's dignity sat just inches away from being lost. An assault in that space felt bigger than the two people involved. It exposed power in motion, a uniformed staffer with unchecked authority, a passenger made to feel small in front of strangers. The stakes were not just the blanket or the seat. They were about whether people would tolerate being treated without respect when the crew wielded power. The woman had every reason to escalate, but she stayed composed. That calm would become crucial. It also set the scene for a reveal no one expected. The cabin was a blur of movement and soft announcements. People cinched seatbelts. A toddler fussed 2 rows back. A man in a suit checked his watch for the 3rd time. Then the noise shifted to a hush. A flight attendant approached a woman seated by the window. The woman, mid-30s, steady, held a folded blanket in her lap. She asked politely for help getting the blanket tucked so her child could sleep. Instead of a warm response, the attendant snapped, impatient and loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Sit down and stop making a scene," the attendant barked, then shoved the blanket with a sharp hand against the woman's shoulder. The motion was small but violent, a push that made the woman flinch and clutch the baby closer. Gasps swelled, phones lifted. The woman's face tightened, not with anger at first, but with the shock of being hit. She steadied herself. Her voice stayed soft when she asked, "Why did you do that?" Silence held for a moment, heavy as a curtain. No one moved. The cabin watched. The woman breathed in, calm on the surface, and the question on everyone's mind was obvious. Why would a crew member strike a passenger?